Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another of the uncomfortable conversations. This time we're talking about coercive control with Claire Dellar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Habergam, I'm Chair of the Women's Network at NHS Digital. I'm really pleased to be here today talking about such a sensitive subject. Before we start, I just want to recognise the fact that this is a sensitive subject, and there may well be people who are on this call who feel very personally impacted by the story. There will be at various periods during the next 30 minutes places that you can go for support listed within the chat, so please feel free to use those if any of this creates concern for you as an individual. Likewise, if after the call you feel that there's more support needed, then please get in touch and we can refer you through some of the channels we have through HR, etc. But we don't want anybody to leave this call feeling that they don't know where they can go for support, so please use those opportunities. So welcome, Claire, and thank you very much for joining us today to talk about coercive control. You've shared a blog post, which I hope some of the people on the call have read, but can we start with your sort of description of what coercive control is?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Rachel. So coercive control, it's a form of domestic violence. It's not necessarily a physical abuse, it's an emotional or a mental control. And it's about making that person dependent on the abuser so that that person retains some control over them. For instance, controlling what they wear, where they go, who they can associate with, isolating them from their friends and family, preventing them from being able to interact properly at work. For instance, not letting me go on team nights out unless he was also invited, so he could control who I spoke to, and I would get a lot of grief afterwards if he had not had my full attention all evening. So there's those kinds of behaviours that are about isolating the person and making them dependent on the abuser.
So your experience started when you went to university.
Yes.
So looking back now, what were some of the early signs that you saw that maybe things weren't quite as you expected?
Oh, I think it crept up on me, and I think for many people it does. It starts out actually possibly sounding quite romantic. When somebody is jealous of people you talk to, you think, gosh, they must really love me if he's jealous. But then I realized at one point, for instance, so the person who I was in a relationship with was vegan. And at the start, I said, look, I'm happy to be vegetarian. I'm not necessarily willing to go all the way to vegan. And we agreed that we had some boundaries. But every meal, he would make me feel guilty about something I was eating that wasn't vegan. And I found that I was actually sneaking around behind his back to eat meat because it was a rebellion. And there's obviously something wrong if you're having to hide the fact that you're eating spare ribs and then quickly gargling mouthwash to prevent them being able to pick up on the fact. So I think I knew then. I didn't really realise how bad it was. I just thought I needed to talk to him properly.
And you talked in your blog, you sort of gave us a little tempter as some of what was to come about going to Vietnam, which, at face value looks like an amazing experience, a place I'd love to visit. And you had that opportunity for an adventure of a lifetime. Clearly, it didn't work out that way. So how did things change as you went on this adventure to Vietnam?
Yeah, well, first off, he didn't want me to go. But it was part of my degree course. And I was like, I'm not missing out on this opportunity. So I came to an arrangement with him where we would get a flat together because it was half of third year. We'd get a flat together. I'd move in over the summer, and then he would be on his own in the flat for the 4 months that I was going to be away. So he had my things around him. He knew I was coming back to him. It was all about creating a sense of him having some ownership over me. And he laid down some pretty strict rules that I had to talk to him in a chat room. Remember, this is 20 years ago. it was pre-WhatsApp. So I had to be in a chat room at a particular time every day. And if I was late, he would run this massive guilt trip of, I thought you'd had an accident, I thought you'd been killed. He was also pressuring me over what was I eating out there, those kinds of things. So he was really restricting and controlling my social life and my work life, because I was actually working while I was over there. I was working at the university, doing some lecturing, and I was doing some volunteer work. And so everything had to be run past him, and everything had to revolve around being in this chat room in an internet cafe at a particular time. While I was out there, joined the Hanoi International Church, which was a fantastic place for me to meet with like-minded people and to socialize as well as to worship. And talking with a few people, mainly the elders, about what was going on, I started to feel really uncomfortable about it. But some of my peers thought it sounded romantic, and so there was this push and pull of, actually, you know, who do I believe? Then reading week came, which is kind of half term for universities, and he, without warning, appeared on my doorstep in Vietnam. So a person who had been saying I shouldn't go because I shouldn't be flying because it, you know, carbon emissions and so on, which I totally accept, had flown 5,000 miles around the world to a place where he was really uncomfortable because he wasn't sure he could get vegan food and things like that, to turn up on my doorstep. And I found that really scary. Suddenly I'd gone from romantic, jealous boyfriend to stalker. And he went to my church and spoke to many of the people, and the elders were polite but reserved with him. But he spoke to some of my peers, and he actually won over some of my friends and got them to advocate on his behalf. He, at the same time, he went to the embassy and told them I'd been inducted into a cult, and that was why I'd left him. He followed me around Hanoi every time I left the house. He was behind me. He must have spent a fortune, because he literally was sat there with a taxi waiting if I left. He was outside my lecture rooms in university. He was in the same room as me at church, and it just got so creepy. Some of the elders actually took me into their home for a few days, and eventually he went back to the UK. What I didn't know was, back in the UK, he had been talking to my friends and telling them untrue and nasty things about me. He'd actually hacked my email account and was deleting unread emails from friends and telling those friends that I wasn't interested in being friends with them anymore. So he was isolating me from that. I hadn't known he'd actually copied my key to my second year flat, and he'd gone in when I was in lectures and stolen things like birthday cards. So I thought people didn't care. He intercepted presents, and then he used the details that he had. He got in touch with my grandmother, who was in her late 80s, and told her if I didn't get back together with him, he'd commit suicide. At that point, and I'm 5,000 miles away in Vietnam, I'm trying to reassure my poor grandmother. I'm paying a fortune for the phone calls. I'm trying to get hold of the police in the UK. That's really 20 years ago. That was really difficult from abroad. Trying to talk to the university about it, and I knew I was going to have to come back and face him in order to get my stuff out of the flat. So I arrived back. My mum and stepdad came down and supported me, and my stepdad was literally on the phone to the police as I'm knocking on the door, going, we're worried he's committed suicide in there, because we know he's in there, but he's locked the door from the inside. My mum climbed through a window, managed to unlock the front door, and thankfully he was okay. And my stepdad persuaded him to leave while I moved my stuff out. The one friend, a mature student, who had not bought everything he said and had come to me and said, I'm sure there's another side to this, help me arrange another flat. Unfortunately, I was quite politically active and I wanted to vote, so I registered to vote. Because this guy was a member of the Green Party, he had access to the restricted electoral rolls, so he found me. And he was turning up at all times of the day and night. And he still had the phone numbers to it. Like, my parents and my grandparents had to change their phone numbers, things like that. I had to move house, I think, 3 times before I shook him off. And I couldn't vote because I had to completely leave the electoral roll, which has other effects, affects things like your credit rating. University, so there was, I can't prove it was him, but there was one occasion where my bike had, we saw afterwards, very obviously the brakes had been tampered with, which, given that usually the first time I would have applied the brakes as I left university was a really busy T-junction, could have killed me. He's caught on CCTV going in and out of the bike area, not with a bike, but the CCTV didn't cover my bicycle, so I can't prove anything there. But it got really quite scary. The police, 20 years ago, they were like, this is just a spat between university students. They said, well, he hasn't done anything. He's not actually harmed himself. He's not harmed you. He's allowed to walk around campus and stand outside your lecture rooms, that kind of thing. At university, were a bit more helpful. The porters started escorting me around campus. That's literally how bad it got.
And if we look at history 20 years ago, coercive control was not illegal in the way it is today. So a very different climate, nonetheless, still very difficult to prove today. A very difficult challenge. You talked there about the elders and the peers at the church, which I think is really interesting in terms of the sort of the different roles that they played. And bearing in mind, you said at the beginning you felt that this was romantic. At what stage did any of your sort of close family and friends start to ask any questions or suggest to you that there was something not quite right, and were you open to listening to that?
He came home with me for Christmas in second year, and my mum took me to one side afterwards and was like, are you sure you're okay with this? Because he's just told you to go change what you're wearing because it's too revealing. And she was sneaking me bits of turkey because I'd had to sit there and eat nut roast for Christmas dinner in front of him. And there was a bit of me that was thinking, this can't be right if my parents are having to help me go behind his back. But on the other hand, I thought it was a maturity thing. I thought he would get more comfortable and that he would relax when he felt sure of me. And actually, it just got worse. I can remember him literally barring the door of the flat saying, you are not leaving dressed like that. And I was wearing a top like this. I wasn't exactly, nobody should be able to tell me what I wear anyway, but I wasn't wearing anything remarkably revealing. I was just wearing a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. But they were too tight. The neckline was too low for him. Yeah.
I think, you talked a little bit there, didn't you, about, family identifying that there was something not right. And we all say, hindsight's in some ways a great thing, in some ways not so great a thing. And we have to recognise in all these conversations, everybody's journey is really personal. Yes. But are there actions that you think it would have been helpful for friends, family, or colleagues to take? I think one of the questions we've been asked in a number of different ways is, you know, if you are working with somebody where you think there may be something happening that is, you know, not positive, are there some sensitive ways, because this is a really difficult subject, you don't want to be accusatory in any way, but you want to support people, so it'd be good to explore things that you think either did work for you or might have worked for you in hindsight.
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is it will depend absolutely on your relationship with the person. And it's the things that worked with me were when people asked me questions, not saying I thought that was very controlling of him to stop you from sitting next to that person, but to say, are you comfortable with that? Or where does that come from? And that starts you questioning, but it hasn't threatened you, because if somebody comes up and say, I think that's wrong, your immediate reaction is you don't want it to be wrong. And you don't want to admit that you've been wrong and you've been an idiot, as I thought then. I wouldn't say that about somebody now, but you know, I was ashamed. There was quite a period where I realized I had made a mistake, but my pride wouldn't let me break up with that person, because it would mean admitting I was wrong. So saying things like I'm not sure about that is actually can actually reinforce that sense of, if I do break up with this person, it's going to look like I was wrong, that person was right, and it gets an ego involved. The other thing I'd say, so about 10 years later, I was in a position where a neighbour and friend told me some very disturbing information, that she was being physically as well as emotionally abused. And I didn't know what I could do, but I worked for the police at the time. So I spoke to my superintendent, and they said, you can report things anonymously. Whether it's 111 or Crime Stoppers, you can talk to them. They can give you advice as to things that you might drop into conversation that might persuade that person to come forward. But also, phoning 111 was really important, because actually they put a flag on her address and her mobile number. So if she made a 999 call, which she did at one point, it would immediately trigger an emergency response. So, and even if she phoned up and didn't actually say anything, they sent a patrol car immediately. So I think the other thing is to recognize that actually it takes a long time for somebody to disentangle themselves, and sometimes people go back, and you can't hold yourself responsible for that. But also don't give up on them for that. It takes on average 7 attempts for a person experiencing domestic violence to leave for good.
Yeah. I think there's some, you know, really helpful pointers in there. I think it's interesting when we relate that to the world of work, isn't it? In terms of both, do you think that those experiences have influenced how you behave at work, and some of what you might or might not expect, and also, you know, are there other things that from a workplace perspective would be helpful?
Yeah, there's something that I realised when you and I were chatting that was quite revelatory to me. I realised that this experience probably left me open to being manipulated in the same way, not necessarily with future partners, but actually at work. And all the instances I can think of where I was bullied or in a difficult and unpleasant situation, the person who was doing that was using exactly the same methods and hitting exactly the same triggers. And that tells me that even though my 22-year-old self was naively going, I'll never let that happen to me again. And was saying stupid things like it would have been easier if he'd hit me because then I'd have had some evidence and it would have shocked me, which is rubbish. And that is not the case. But I naively felt it at the time. And actually, I need to recognize that that is my weak spot. I'm a people pleaser. And he immediately focused in on that. Everything was about, you have displeased me. And that's my trigger at work, it's my trigger at home, it's my trigger in relationships. So I have to guard myself and be cognizant of, am I pleasing people beyond the point that's actually reasonable?
And you can see straight away from what you said there that there could be a link. And I think one of the things that it's helpful we're raising today is, you know, it doesn't matter when something happened, it can be many years ago, but much of it is still there in terms of how we respond or how we feel, etc., because it's, you know, those things don't just disappear. I suppose in terms of that that journey and that support, what would you recommend outside of, you know, close family and friends that people could do as a baby step? Because I think it is a lot about baby steps, isn't it? If they're feeling they're in a similar position, because I totally understand, you know, 7 times is an average. A lot, it takes a lot longer, doesn't it, to actually start to take some steps forward. Was there anything from you know, more of organisations or, you know, anything like that you'd say is helpful rather than, you know, your immediate support network?
Well, for a start, I'd say this conversation is, I hope, incredibly helpful to other people, because domestic violence has such a stigma and it carries such a weight of shame, because you're made to believe that this is your fault and it's right that he is punishing you and that you don't have the ability to manage your own money or make your own decisions as to what you wear. So organizations can play a big part in having those conversations that are uncomfortable and having them repeatedly, so that eventually they become more comfortable and it becomes an easier environment for people to open up. Leaving an abuser with the support of your employer, for instance, is a heck of a lot easier. You know, if I think back, as I was at university, but I had the support of the organisation I was in. They provided me with the security, with the safety net. They made sure that their policies meant that it wouldn't be easy for him to find me. For instance, not publishing my schedule. It used to be that they published a list of who was studying what courses. And from that, he could have worked out, and he did work out, which lecture theatres I was going to be in at what time. And he was always outside them. So the organisation reviewed the way it handled information so that it was protecting me and many other people. I think the other thing is that if you're a line manager who is supporting somebody who's going through this, they are going to need a pass. You know, there are going to be days when they can't concentrate. There are going to be days when they have to be absent because they're doing yet another police report. The number of police reports I had to submit, and they took up so much time. And every time it re-traumatized me because I had to repeat it again. And that is going to be a long-term process for that person. So looking at things like mental health policies and supporting people who are going through these difficult circumstances. And the last thing I'd say is, we're teams. We are an organisation of amazing, caring people. If you gather around that person and give them your implicit support, even if you never say anything, but you make it obvious that you are their buddy, that is going to give them the confidence to move away from that abuser.
And I think, you know, it's a difficult one for lots of organisations. You know, it's in some ways exciting, which seems an odd choice of phrase, that actually we do now have a small group that are looking at the support that NHS Digital provides to people who are victims of domestic violence. And I think it's really important that we sensitively handle that conversation and work out what might be best. And we take that from lived experiences. And you know, Claire knows I'm asking these questions for a reason. I haven't personally experienced it, but I've supported my daughter through it. And this is, you know, so recognise there are a number of people who might be impacted by it as well, I think is really helpful. I suppose in sort of closing, Claire, and coming to an end, you know, massive thanks for sharing what is a very, very personal journey, as we said, and it will be different for everybody. It's really important we recognise that, and I would encourage people, regardless of, you know, why you're on here, if this has raised anything, as I said right at the beginning, please feel free to reach out to any of the links that we've shared in the chat and use those. Equally, if you feel, you know, immediately after this call there's something more you want to do, my diary is open for the next 30 minutes or so if anybody needs to have a conversation and be signposted elsewhere, because it's fantastic we have uncomfortable conversations, but we also know there are consequences of those conversations, and we have to support everybody through that as we raise some still fairly taboo subjects in our organisation. So massive thanks for being so honest, Claire. Massive thanks to the people who have asked some questions in the chat that have really helped to inform how we've taken this conversation. And I suppose, Claire, is there anything else that you would like to add in sort of the closing minutes to just conclude this really, really insightful conversation?
I think I want to echo what you said, that if you've spoken to one survivor of domestic abuse, you've spoken to exactly one survivor of domestic abuse. And just because mine didn't have a physical element doesn't mean that it is any more or less serious. That actually we need to not think about what we think is the impact, but actually think about what's the impact that that person is experiencing. It's very much a personal thing, as you've said. So however we might handle it isn't necessarily the right way for that person to handle it. So it's just about being supportive, and please ask, what can I do? How can I help?
I think that's a really good place to finish, Claire. Definitely, hopefully everybody takes that on board. And again, thank you very much for all of your time. Obviously, this will be available recorded at a later date as well. So thank you very much, everybody.